Go ahead and start again. It's my pleasure to be here, and thanks to Daniel and the rest of the our medicine team for having me for this fun demonstration I'll have for you with a little bit of background beforehand on a lot of the revelation I've had in the recent year on how I've been developing robust production quality Shiny applications, but with some new tooling based on the Nix package manager and the Rix package that kind of ties it all together for those of us using R. Now, this is where Eric's going to tell you in full disclosure. When I submitted this talk, I was actually not aware that the author of Rix himself, Bruno Rodrigues, is also doing a workshop in this very same conference 2 days from now on Wednesday about Rix and Nix as well. So when I found out he was doing that, I talked with him a little bit. I wanted to make sure what I'm talking about today is not like duplicating a lot of the effort that he has already put together for his workshop on Wednesday. So I am taking the stance of giving you kind of my take on where Nix and Rix play in my workflow, but also I am putting this in the context of Shiny application development because I see this as a really nice, you might say, marriage made in development heaven, so to speak. I think it's got a lot of potential here, and I'm excited to talk with you with this today. So I will be introducing a little bit of background here, and then I'm going to show a demonstration of an app I've created for the purposes of this demonstration involving some fun survey data from the US government that we can look at related to health data and go from there. I will pause at certain points for any questions along the way, so certainly feel free to log those, and I will also put in the chat if it's not obvious the slides, if I can find my chat panel here, so y'all can take a look at that on your screens if you have any issues with the screen share and all that. So let's dive right into it. In my journey with Shiny over the years, I've learned one thing is it's just, well, among many things, that it's never just Shiny, because oftentimes we don't just use the Shiny package itself to develop the Shiny apps. We have additional art packages. In fact, you heard Daniel mention one of my favorite recently is Reactable for table visualizations. We'll see that a bit later. But it doesn't stop on the R side, right? We also may have some external services, maybe some APIs we're interacting with, perhaps even other languages entirely, like say Python or JavaScript. You might have additional dependencies via the system, so to speak, that the app is running on for these packages, as well as different ways you can deploy your application. There's not just one way to do it. We're going to talk about ways that we can enable multiple deployments throughout this demo here. So for managing dependencies, historically, up until about a year and a half ago, I have relied on two fundamental technologies to help make my life easier as a Shiny app author. One, from the R side of things, the renv or the renv package, which if you're not familiar, is what you can use in your R session to snapshot the versions of R packages that you're leveraging in your project. Doesn't have to be Shiny, it could be anything really. This is actually the successor to a package called PackRat, also authored by Kevin Uche at Posit, that has been used for many years in these contexts. RM kind of takes a lot of the learning from PackRat, makes it a bit better. But in my recent development life, I've never just relied on RM anymore, especially for my open source work. I also rely on container technology, specifically with the Docker or the Podman container runtimes, where now you're bundling kind of the entire system dependencies into an executable container of sorts based in Linux. These have been an interesting combination for me for many years, and I've gotten pretty far with it. And in fact, you might have seen my previous live streams on the Shiny Developer Series where I've actually talked about this workflow I had where I combined Visual Studio Code with these custom development containers for Shiny, for just typical data science. And I gotten pretty far with it, and it's been a lot of fun to learn in that journey. But there was a new challenge of sorts in the reproducible environment. And the first time I got wind of this is from my friends over at Jupiter Broadcasting, who authors some of the leading podcasts about Linux and open source software. And lo and behold, in 2022, they take what's called the Nix OS Challenge. I have absolutely no idea what this is. I've never heard of this before, but I listen with interest. And it didn't stop there because there's another very good friend of mine in the open source community, pictured here, named Martin Wimpress, who is the author of a Linux distribution called Ubuntu Mate, and he also is a very top-notch developer in the software community. He actually pivoted in his day job to work at a vendor that actually puts Nix into enterprise systems. And in fact, he would also do live streams, and he was showing how he was converting some of his Linux and open source software installations to the Nix framework. So this gets my attention. Now, two of my, Vegas Linux friends in the open source community are pursuing Nix. So I'm keeping an eye on it. Not fully convinced yet, but it looks intriguing. And then what I call the worlds collide happened because Bruno Rodrigues, who I just mentioned at the top, I've been following him for many years and his great blog. He suddenly comes out with a reproducible data science of Nix blog series, which is one of my open source duties as part of the R Weekly team. And I see these stories come through in our issue. And the issue I curated at this time in 2023, this made one of our highlights, which meant on my R Weekly Highlights podcast, I co-host with Mike Thomas, I need to actually talk about each of the highlights. So then I was forced to talk more about Nix, but what he was learning and coming from RM and Docker. And like I said, this wasn't just one blog post. He's done a whole series of it, which has culminated with the Rix package that we'll be hearing about shortly. So this is when I say to myself, okay, I really want to pay attention to this now. This looks really intriguing to me. So, what is Nix exactly? This is, again, Bruno is going to touch a lot of this in his workshop. I'm going to give you my take on it, and hopefully there is, a bit of synergy there. Nix is not just one thing. It is a package manager, but it's also got its own domain-specific language. It's also what we call an immutable installation, and it gives you a way to sandbox your development environments that you bootstrap Nix with. You hear all those four things, but you may be wondering, well, Eric, yeah, that's great and all, but really, what is Nix? So let's dive into some of these a bit before we get to the demo here. Again, at its core, Nix is a package manager. And when I say just a package manager, it actually has over, at the time of me speaking here, over 120,000, and notice I'm using the word recipes here, different applications, utilities, languages, and much more. It is very much tightly coupled with GitHub. In fact, these recipes of these packages, we call it, are all hosted on GitHub. And that means with GitHub, if you're familiar with version control, you have a way with Git to kind of pin something at a very, say, a tag or a point in time. Nix is able to do this too with their package repository hosted on GitHub. And they do a certain amount of releases every year where it's kind of a snapshot in time for what they call their Nix OS as well. Here's the really nice thing. On top of having these utilities on, it's smart enough to detect when a certain system library is required for these dependencies and automatically install them when you need to. That should sound a bit familiar. But before we get to the connection there, you may be wondering, okay, how do you actually bootstrap Nix? So the good news is you don't need a full-fledged operating system to do this. You can just use what's called the Nix installer from a vendor called Determinate Systems, which my friend Martin Wimpress actually joined back in 2023 when I showed you that intro earlier. So you can, again, you can try this on your own after this demo if you like, in preparation for Bruno's workshop on Wednesday. You can either go to the GitHub repo, the link is in the slides, or you can run a curl command. Again, you always want to be kind of cautious when you run curl commands in your terminal, but I know this vendor very well. They're not going to destroy your system. The other thing to note is that you can install this Nix installer, which is basically the package manager on Linux, Mac OS 10, and Windows. But the caveat for Windows is that you have to do this for the Windows subsystem for Linux, which in essence gives you a Linux virtual machine baked into the Windows operating system. So it's not just a very seamless installation, but with the WSL configured, then you can do that. But again, Linux and Mac OS 10, you can install it right away. Now, you may be wondering just what does this really mean in the big picture of me trying things out? You can actually do something fun once you have the Nix package installer on and kind of try before you buy, so to speak. So let's watch this little screen demo here. You can run what's called a Nix shell, and you can install any of these packages that are available on the Nix package repository. Here, I am installing something called a Pokemon Say package, and that was from the ShinyCon, so I didn't update the GIF here. But that is showing you I can enter this development shell, run a command, or install something, run a command, exit out of the shell, and if you notice, when I tried to run that same command in my normal Linux session, that command was not found. There's your sandboxing right there. You can have a self-contained environment all within Nix, but without, making the whole system aware of that dependency you installed. That was really intriguing to me when I got my head around that. So under the Nix hood, again, I'm going to let Bruno speak to a lot of this in his workshop, but basically you have kind of a few different components here. Your system's going to have what's called a store, basically a set of directories where it's going to install the binaries associated with these different software. Maybe it gets a binary directly from GitHub, maybe it has to compile it from source, but either way, this store is a place where everything gets installed, but you as a user cannot manipulate it outside of what the Nix package manager does. You can't just go in here and just willy-nilly remove these directories. It's immutable. It means you can't touch it. It's also, these recipes are specifically called derivations in the Nix domain-specific language, where it's telling you instructions for how to install these various utilities. And what I'm showing you here is for that fun little Pokemon, say, software utility, what Nix, the package manager, needs to install this. So I'm not going to read all this verbatim. It looks like a whole bunch of Linuxy kind of commands, but there is something like this for every package out there in the Nix ecosystem. Now, what's nice though, as I mentioned, it gets all the dependencies automatically. So Nix is going to figure out for that package you want to install, what are the dependencies you need? And you can see here, you can query that if you should choose. And you can see I got all these different dependencies for that Pokemon Say utility, including things like Perl, zlib, again, things you probably won't interact with on a daily basis, but it's taking care of this for you, which again is a really nice feature to have. Now, that's great if you know Nix and you want to learn that at the low level, but you're an R user, right? You want an easy way to get involved with this without having to become an expert in Nix right away. You can kind of develop your expertise as you go. That's where the Rix package comes in. Rix, authored by Bruno Rodrigues and Philipp. I forget his last name, unfortunately. It's on my slides. It is a way to have a project-specific sandbox powered by the Nix package manager on your R session where you can create these recipes or these derivations to install things like R and its associated packages all within R itself. You get access to almost all of the CRAN package repository and bioconductor via the Nix package repository. You also have the capability to install packages from GitHub, which is great for the bleeding edge packages out there. And if you were an RN user like I was and still am to an extent, you could actually take those RN block files and convert them to one of these derivations that the Nix package manager needs to then convert your workflow to the Nix package manager should you choose. You don't have to, but it's all there. So we're going to look at a demo that shows a lot of this in action, but in essence, Rix, the package, gives you a way to bootstrap these different derivations or configurations out of the box with a function called Rix. You can specify either the R version or a date, a quote unquote snapshot in time that you'd like your dependencies to be based on, which packages you want from the R side of things, any additional system packages you want. Like here, I just threw in the Pokemon, say, just for giggles there. Also, any GitHub packages that may be only on GitHub and not on CRAN, you just need the repository URL and the commit that you're basing that installation off of for the package. And that's really it from the Rick standpoint. What it's going to do is going to give you a Nix configuration file that, again, is what the Nix package manager needs to understand. And then you can also, and again, you may not know what all this means. I'm not going to translate all of it today, but you will see some various things here. Like these are a list of R packages and this build inputs. You see system packages here. R is in there along with this Pokemon say. Some stuff for the shell, and then you're done. And what this really looks like in practice, we can just run a little screen grab here. This is the really fun part here. This Nix shell with the EXPR. Let me pause this here for a second. This is actually taking a script on the Rix package manager on GitHub, or the package repository on GitHub. It is bootstrapping R with the Rix package on the fly to a custom shell, all within one terminal command. Then you could launch R from this shell. And let's say you had that script, that R script that had those installation instructions. You can then run that in your session. You can quit out of that. You can exit out of this shell, and then you can build this environment right on the spot. And I did it, like a cooking show. I did it earlier in that demo. And then you enter the shell. Then you can launch R. There it is, R443, package version shiny. It's there. You can quit out of this, and then you can exit that shell or keep going. That is mind-blowing to me. You actually don't need R on your system, so to speak, to try Rix right now. That is mind-blowing to me. And we'll see why that is very helpful down the road. All right, so it looks like my navigation kind of went haywire there. So let's talk about what this looks like as a Shiny developer. And this is where I'm going to transition to the demo time. I have a very small app that I've made for purposes of today, exploring what's called the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, NHANES for short. This is survey data collected from citizens in the US between 2012 and 2018. I've bootstrapped all those data sets. I am actually using the Golem package in R, which is a package to help convert your Shiny app to a package format. I've been a big fan of Golem ever since it came out, and my catchphrase for it is once you go Golem, you never go back, at least for me anyway. And there is a link to the repository that we'll work through today. But before I go to the demo, I want to just maybe quick pause for a minute here. Any quick questions on kind of the background of Rix and Nix? I'm happy to answer them now, if you'd like. Feel free to come off mute if you like.
While people may be coming off mute, Eric, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Because I use the renv and Docker solution primarily.
Yes.
So sometimes it does happen that I have a beautiful lock file and then I go to install them and things don't install.
Yep.
So
Been
with this kind of plan in the Nix Rix environment, do you sometimes run into something similar?
The good news is much less frequently, if ever. That's the beauty of this, is that it's based kind of on these snapshots in time via the Nix package manager, and it's get backing on GitHub. The only time I've had an issue was in some esoteric cases if I bootstrap the Nix and Rix environment on my Linux system, which I'm talking to you on now, and then I tried to move that to my Apple MacBook for my day job because that's running Apple Silicon. Some things don't compile as well on Apple Silicon, but not like the RM situation where that could happen, like you said, Daniel, even if you're on the same operating system. Sometimes it just randomly will not install. Anything to do with like some of the tidyverse dependencies, like vectors or other ones, they say hello. That's happened to me many times. So with Nix, I have not had that issue primarily.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's the worst little greeting to get from vectors in curl and our CPP.
Yes,
Those are the
I,
ones that
I
get me.
I know Paz is trying to make things better. I think they just released a blog post on portable Linux binaries for the POSIT package manager. Maybe that'll help down the road. But again, one thing about Nix is that you build it once, and if you don't change your configuration, it's always going to install those specific versions, and those dependencies are taken care of for you. So that'll be nice.
Nice. There is a question in the chat. Is Rix or Nix able to install R packages from our universe or from POSIT Package Manager? Oh, great question.
Excellent question. The unfortunate news is, as of now, no, because it's so far the only sources are from CRAN, Bioconductor, and if you want a bleeding edge package from GitHub directly. Because the Nix, we are piggybacking off of the Nix package manager itself, and they sync up with CRAN. Now, this is an interesting diversion because Bruno may talk about this more on Wednesday, but Bruno and his collaborators have actually created their own cache of Nix packages specific for R that are updated more frequently than what the global, you might say, default Nix package repository does. So he bakes all that in for you when you use Rix. He kind of ties it into their cache on the spot when you first install something. But as of now, no, the package manager from POSIT's not supported yet. Maybe will in the future, but as of now, no.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, maybe we'll go ahead and get to the demo then, because I think that's where the fun stuff is. Well, actually, I do want to take this one because it is right on the same lines from
We have
Nicholas. He's
actually one more question before we jump to the demo, if that's okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's jump into that.
Oh, great.
I see it here. So Nick is asking, how easy is it to update packages over, say, a 1 year period, but then keep it locked via Nix? Should Nix only be utilized once freezing is needed? So that's where you can choose how you want to proceed here. But let's say you did start it, now and then next year, you realize, say, Shiny gets updated, maybe Reactable gets updated, or whatever key dependency gets updated. You basically want to configure then what is that point in time you're bootstrapping your environment on. So you can keep most of your same infrastructure, but just change via the Rix package, either the date associated with that snapshot or the R version, if the R version upgraded as well. I admit I'm still getting my head around long-term usage of Nix because most of it's pretty short-term. It's not as easy to update packages on a one by one basis with it. You're kind of locked into what is the point in time that you base your snapshot on, or by proxy, the R version. If you update that, then there is potential for other packages that already got updates in the Nix package manager to be pulled down as well. The hope is that, and what I've seen at least, is that you will not have any gotchas with refreshing your dependency environment. Anything that doesn't need updating will not update. It's only the stuff that needs updating will be updated in your system. But ask me a year from now, hopefully I keep the same answer. But right now, my short-term usage has been about a year and a half, and I haven't really updated development environments all that much just yet. So great question, Nicholas. Thank you for that. All right, let's dive into the demo here. Tempt fate here, but I kind of went a little rogue here, so forgive me. I'm gonna zoom in my terminal here for a bit because I want to show you some really interesting stuff. So let's close Positron for a second. Okay, I promise I had this all prepared, but I forgot to zoom in on my terminal here. Right here. Let's clear the terminal here. This is a directory where I've got my GitHub repo cloned locally for this project. And right now, I'm in my Linux shell right here. So to prove what's fun about all this, contrary to what may be popular belief, I do not have R installed on this system right now. You can see the proof here. There is no R, not here. Meanwhile, when I go into the shell, I've already done it before, so it's going to be pretty quick here. You see now I'm in, the prompt has changed a bit. Now we see nix-shell. Now, if I see if I'm in R, there it is. I've got R version 4.5.0. My host system does not have R on it. That's pretty neat because what this means is that depending on the project, maybe this version of R is great. Maybe I want an earlier version of R. Maybe it's a legacy code base I want to convert to Nix. I get that freedom via Rix to pull this off. Here's the real fun part. I already kind of showed it by accident a bit. I'm using Positron now for a lot of my development in R these days. It's the next generation IDE that Posit's created, the successor to RStudio, you might say. I can launch Positron from this directory. And Positron, with no configuration on my part, found R version 4.5.0 in this environment. Right there. No futz with environment paths or directory paths. This is mind-blowing to me. This means I can have my favorite IDE on a per project basis, just know which version of R to use when I launch it from that shell. That's what the power of that Nix shell comes in. It gives you that sandbox development environment. And here I can now run my app if I choose. Now the question is, how did I actually get this environment set up? So let's go and start looking at some code here. We're going to go on the dev side of things, and you'll see why I organize this in a little bit. I have a script, and let me know if I need to zoom in a bit. I'm on a 4K monitor. You know how that goes. So let's do that here. This is my, I call it generate environment script, very creatively named genenv.r. This is where I load the Rix package, and then I do some fancy stuff for the app as a package. We'll get to that later. This is the meat of it right here, this Rix function call. I told you there are two ways of determining the point in time of your snapshot of your development, either by the date parameter or by the rver parameter. So I decided to do it near the end of May, and just by chance, that means R version 4.5.0 was released as a current version. So that's what it picked up. And then in my R packages vector, this is where I put all the packages that I think my app is going to need. Full disclosure, I don't use all of them yet because I didn't get as far in my development of it, but I future-proofed it, so to speak, of a lot of things here in case I needed it. I won't explain that one right now, but this is the fun part here. You can have not just the R packages, but the system packages as well. You might be asking, Eric, it's a Shiny app. Why on earth did you throw Quartal on here? That's because in this repository, I actually have a folder with the slides. So I'm using the same development environment to compile the Quartal slides because it's all here. It's all just right here. And Positron was aware of it. Again, mind-blowing to know. I did IDE none here because you'll hear about this on Wednesday if you attend Bruno's workshop. You can actually install the RStudio IDE in this Nix shell if you choose. It'll be basically its own version of RStudio tailored to that development environment. You could also use Visual Studio Code, and the team is working on Positron support to install it in the development environment if you choose. I've actually installed Positron in my main system, but you could do it either way. But I just did none here because I'm bringing the IDE to the table, as they say. And with that, just a couple little lines there. And then what that will produce is in the root of my repo, this default.nix file, where Rix is going to automatically put what was the command to generate it. Great way for reproducibility, right? You see exactly what the heck it did. to get to the actual Nix DSL language variant of how to install all this. So again, I won't go through the Nix DSL because that could be another 2 hours in and of itself. But just notice here, it's got the package names right here in this list. Also got the system packages, and that's where Cordo is, as well as R itself. And then you're done at that point. So that gave me the development environment. And what's nice about if you're just starting from scratch, one little trick you can do, we'll do a new tab for this. Let me get and zoom in here. No, not that. If you wanted to try this with Rix directly, without even Rix or R being on your system, I have an alias for this. Let me see if I can print it here. I have an alias called Rix Shell. This is in the Rix documentation vignette. You can run with the Nix package manager this custom expression where it's going to grab one of these bootstrapping scripts that the Rix package has in their inst directory and run it on your system. So I can just do this Rix shell. Let me go to a different directory just in case. Do this Rix shell here. And then here, I'm in another version of R. Just happens to be 450 by coincidence, but this is a different installation than what I have in the other workspace that I'm showing you. So you can actually try all this without even having R in your system. That's still kind of bonkers to me how all that works, but it does because the Nix package manager can take these recipes from almost anywhere, including GitHub. That was kind of mind blowing to me. All right, so to prove that the Shiny app works, we'll talk about kind of where I think Nix fits in this picture here. Let's go ahead and run the app in temp fate here with Golem. We have Golem run dev to run this interactively, and let's hope everything works. And I believe it does. Okay, so very simple Golem app here. We have a little welcome page here, which I would have added more, but ran out of time. Got a sidebar here, and then this is where I have my little data explorer powered by Reactable with all the merged demographic and some blood pressure data for the survey cohort given for each year. It's a little slow on my system because I'm doing the screen share, but these are all the variables here. Now, that's all well and good. A lot of people can do a reactable table. I have a filter to choose the different year. So this will automatically refresh up to 2018. This is where the fun comes in. This is using what's called the TO slice package to give me dynamic filters without me having to develop them right away. I can then add a variable here, and I use the labeled package to add the labels to this data frame so you can actually see what these cryptic codes actually mean here. So if I find the age and years, this is review for Daniel here. He's a TO expert, but I can say, okay, my age range is from 0 to 80. Let me just bump that down a bit to 24 about. Automatically filters. Love it. You could add more than one of these if you want, or you can just clear the whole thing. This is what I've done in a day job app very recently. The app customers absolutely love it because I can't predict how they're going to slice and dice their data, but the TO slice module package gives me that capability to do it off the bat. I absolutely love it. So a little bit of niceties here with VSLib. You could download the table as an Excel file if you choose. But all this is running in my local environment powered by Nix. Very utilitarian app, but all the dependencies have been taken care of. There are some things that I've learned with Shiny that Nix kind of doesn't play nice to, which I'll get to as I share some things. But in essence, it worked. No renv involved, just the packages that were installed in this development library. My description file looks like nothing out of the ordinary. It's got all my packages I depend on here. Just works. Very simple like that. Now, you may be wondering, Eric, well, yeah, you're midway through the development of your app and you realize, oh, geez, I need that other package to do such and such feature. Let's walk through what this looks like. let's say if I had infinite time before today, I was going to add a nice little line chart with the e-charts for R library. For those that aren't aware, I'm just going to give a plug here because I absolutely love this. I'm going to put the page on here and I'll put it in the chat. This is one of my absolute favorite HTML widget R packages, whether Shiny or just Portal or Markdown or whatnot, offered by John Kuhn. He's been very prolific in the R Shiny community. Absolutely love this package. Let's say I wanted to use this for something, but future or past me didn't realize I want that in my system. So you notice how I maintain this genm script here? Let's say I just add it here. I can just add it, e-charts for R. Save this out. Now, again, this doesn't do anything yet. All this says is that this is my Rix script, R script, to generate the environment, but I need to refresh it, right? There are multiple ways to do this. I'll just show you my preferred way of doing it. I will close out Positron. I'll go back to my fancy schmancy terminal here, and I will go back to this one here. I had too many tabs. When you run Positron, it gives you a bunch of gobbledygook in the terminal. Don't worry about it. Exit out of it. This is what I'm talking about. Because Nix is immutable, some packages like bslib, or there's a package it depends on, is trying to write some CSS stuff to the file system. But I told you Nix is immutable. Some of these temp areas, even in this environment, are not writable by certain processes. So it's getting angry at me about these SVG font files. I have no idea how to fix that yet, but it still works. It's just annoying to look at. So nonetheless, so I digress. Now I'm out of my development shell right now. So this is where what I do is I boot up that Rix shell, that custom version of the shell that is upstream to Rix itself. I will launch R here, and then I'm going to go ahead and source that genm script with Rix updating that default.nix. So I'm going to quit out of this, exit this shell, and we're just going to view that default.nix that was just updated. And notice now my call has e-charts for R in the comment there, and e-charts for R, I believe it's alphabetical here. Uh-oh, I think I duplicated it. I must have already had it. Well, this is going to have an error. This is good real-time debugging. Watch what happens when I try to build this. You already have e-charts for R listed twice. So it's not quite, Rix isn't quite smart enough to fix old Eric's here, silly mistake here. So we're going to go back. Let's just do Vim for this because I'm lazy. Deploy genm, and we're going to remove that redundant e-charts for R reference. That was silly me here. So, but that's what you would have done. Now we can run Nix. Well, I have to run that Rix shell again because we got to run Nix one more time with that fixed. I could have just updated the default.nix myself, but I want Rix to handle that updating for me. So that's why I'm doing it a little more verbose here. But again, your mileage may vary for how you want to do this. I'm going to run that again. This should be fine. We're going to find out. Exit the shell. Next build. And this won't actually do anything because eChartsRR was already there. So maybe that wasn't the best example, but now if I do next shell again, let that bootstrap, or I should say enter the shell, that wrong choice of words, positron that thing, back to our friendly positron. Once it finishes loading here, I can just verify package version, charts or R. And there it is, 0.4.5. It's here. So that's the process. If you want to add packages midway through your development, you would just add it to your bootstrapping script, run the Rix package to regenerate that default.nix, build it again, and then get back to your shell. Is it kind of manual? Yeah, but it's worked well for me. So let's take a pause there. Daniel, yeah.
We have a question in the chat if you have a moment.
Of course.
It says, is Nix something similar to a dev container, but Nix doesn't need any container to run, right? It looks like better control of the environment.
Very good point, because that will be a good segue to what I want to wrap up with in my demo here. It is similar in concept, but without a lot of what I'll call the, I don't know, heaviness or what's the right word for it. Containers, dev containers have a lot of footprint on your system. Because I used to use these routinely for my open source work. So every project I did would have its own dev container. That means more Docker or Podman images on your system. That means that it has to rebuild or relaunch that container every time I access it. And if I change anything, it can be a while to get that thing bootstrapped again. They don't really share a whole lot with each other, especially if you do different versions of R for these different dev containers. They're kind of their own thing. Whereas for the Nix mindset, there is a lot of intelligent caching and sharing happening on your system. So if I did another Nix project of R450, it's going to say, oh, Eric already installed on that other project. I could just use a lot of what's there and just copy it here, kind of like an RM does with its cache of sorts. So to me, what's nice is when you run these Nix shell, other than being in that shell, you're really on your host system still. Whereas when you're in a dev container, you're in Docker or Podman now. That can be a gotcha with like file system mounts or not having access to other processes on your host system because the container is really sandbox in that regard. Whereas with a Nix shell, yeah, there is sandboxing happening, but if I want Git can be on my host system and it will still find it. Like you don't need to install Git separately. Whereas for a container, I'd have to make sure all that's available in my dev container, and that can be a bit of a heavy footprint to maintain all that. So, in my humble opinion, for development especially, I think Nix is a really, you know, featured proof alternative to the dev container setup, which I did for years and years.
That caching, that's great, especially if you're working on a lot of projects. You don't want a copy of an entire system for every single one of them sometimes, I imagine. I don't.
Exactly. And with the R version itself, like I said, it'll cache that. So R itself can take a while to compile if you've ever done that on Linux or Mac systems in the past. So the fact that I can run this once in one project, the other project says, oh yeah, he's using the same date. He's using the same R version. Just grab those binaries and shove them here. And then any other additional packages, just compile them in real time. I think that is a very awesome feature. Absolutely. The key though, like the RM experience, like the dev container experience, if you're working in a team environment, you probably want one person to maintain this like environment setup, much like with an RM block file. You kind of want one person in charge of that and then everyone else bases off of that. That's what the purpose of this Gen M script really is this is your recipe to bootstrap the development environment. And as long as your other developers on the project have the Nix package manager installed, they can just clone the repo, run the Nix build, and they are fine. They will have the exact same environment as you for that analytical project. That to me, for a team environment, is a big win there for sure. And I see some kudos from Kinga here. Dev container is unreliable. I have a problem with rebuilding very often, which is so annoying. Been there, done that, even on live streams in the past. And when I rebuilt some, and I was off to Docker debugging nightmares for an hour once. Ask Tan Ho that from the R4DS Slack. um, so we got about 11 minutes left. What I want to talk about now before I get to my takeaways is your eye may have noticed that, hey, Eric, you've been talking about Nix so much. Why on earth do you have a Docker file here? I think Nix can be combined very well with Docker in the context of Shiny, because in the world of newer age hosting platforms, there is one kind of unifying language amongst all those. If you can have your web app of any sort, whether Shiny, Streamlit, whatever, in a container powered by Docker or Podman, they can host it. I'm talking about things like DigitalOcean has their app platform. Fly.io has their app platform. AWS can do this. You know, many of the vendors can do this. So you can actually combine best practices with Docker, but utilize Nix to bootstrap the R side of things and the other system dependencies. So I want to, as we wrap here, I want to show you, you can look at the repo for the full version of this. I am basically setting up Nix on an Ubuntu-based Linux image in Docker to install the package manager using that curl command before, set some environment files, but this is where even if you don't know Docker, you might get the gist of this. Copy that environment script, run the Nix shell to A, set up some cache stuff, that's from Bruno's vignette, but notice this here. Nix shell run R script gen env. That'll generate that default.nix, run Nix build, and that is in essence what I was doing earlier with building all these Nix environments. I'm now doing it in Docker. Then that's like I will call the dependency environment. You can do a clever thing called multi-stage builds in Docker. And now I have, after this base is done, if I update my app and I recompile the package, I can just reinstall the package tar.gz source file of that package source, run this again and have it install the package on top of that. But because Nix already had all those dependencies, it's only going to install that updated app package. It's not going to redo the whole thing again. Very, very nice for caching and speed. And then in the end, I can run an rscript command in the Nix shell to run that Shiny app in Docker, wherever the Docker host is. I could do this locally. In fact, I tested this locally. I can run this as a Docker container on my local system that has Docker on it, but the installation of the R dependencies and any other system dependencies was handled by Nix, not by Docker and Linux directly. That to me is like the secret sauce here. It's hard for me to go back knowing I have this superpower to say, for my development environment, don't care about Docker, I run Nix and Rix. But then I want to deploy, I do care about Docker, but I don't want to give up Nix to do it. I can have them both. That is amazing to me. I can combine both. Bruno has a vignette on the Rix documentation site. I want to add a vignette with this exact type of example, or in addition to the vignette of the Docker vignette with this kind of workflow, because I think for Shiny developers, this is a game changer to me to be able to take advantage of Nix, but still have Docker to compile this as a container and then throw it on whatever service hosting platform is able to take containers. So at work, we're doing some with what's it called, Kubernetes, and Docker containers are hosted on AWS. But this is the kind of workflow I'm going towards, is this kind of workflow. So with that, I'm going to take a little bit of time to wrap up my thoughts about Nix and Rix, and then we'll have some time for Q&A with a few minutes left. Here's what's been good so far. It feels like I'm in a native host environment when I run these. Even though I'm in a Nix shell, it still feels like I'm in my host system. As I said, there's one source of truth for the dev environment, and yes, Docker can play nicely with it too. This is, for most of my experience, reproducible across different operating systems, architectures, maybe some gotchas of Apple Silicon, but the teams are working on that. And as I said, it's really using caching quite nicely. Some things to be cautious about. This is an immutable file system, and any package in R or Python for that matter is doing any temp directory stuff may not play nicely with it. I don't have a lot of details how to solve that yet, but there are maybe some options you can run in a package environment to kind of turn on like more different dev mode settings. I don't know yet. Nix itself is not easy to learn. I'm talking about the DSL around Nix. Don't ask me to translate all that default.nix right now because I don't know all the nicks and crannies of it, but I'm working on it. If you're on a machine with, that was built maybe 5-10 years ago and their hard drive space is limited, be warned, the Nix store can take up space on your system, so you might have to do some garbage collection from time to time. And I will say, Nix has been around for over 20 years, but I feel like data science is still kind of getting into it a bit. So Rix has been a huge advancement. that Bruno, again, has been leading the charge on. I think we're all learning along the way. So I think we're not quite there 100% yet, like containers are for most of the different software development workflows, but Nix is coming on strong, I think. So I've got, well, that's an outdated slide, but there are some additional, not so outdated. There are some other examples that you can look at where I've used the Nix workflow, such as for my R submissions pilot 4 and the submissions working group, the Docker component of that, as well as the WebAssembly version of it. I think I've done both. No, I think it was the Docker component. We also did a fork of what's called a dataset JSON viewer, where I did a WebAssembly version, but used Nix to make that happen. And the presentation itself. It's all there. So I'll probably pause there. We got about 4 minutes left for questions, so I can take, let's see, one in the chat here, and then we'll open it up. Kinga asks, does this mean that I have that does this mean that Nix I can have both Shiny application and in the same environment code that I can debug, which means that in case of failure in the application, I can react quickly instead of putting RStudio? It's all up to you, really. You will have R available on that environment. Whatever you want to debug quickly, it's at your fingertips. You don't need an IDE for it. You don't need RStudio for it. You don't need Positron for it, but you can have it if you want. Just keep in mind, once you enter that Nix shell, you'll have that version of R, that version of packages, and whatever debugging tools you like for whether it's R or a Shiny or an analytical script, you got whatever's available in R to make that happen. So I don't know if that's, yeah, hopefully that answers it, but lots of possibilities. You just got to get in that shell and you're kind of off to the races there. So I've got 3 minutes left. I don't know, Daniel, you have any parting questions or others in the chat?
I don't have any questions myself. Was a fantastic presentation, Eric. I really learned a lot. I'm excited to see the development here. Like for my use cases, I would definitely need more flexibility in installation from GitLab, from Posit Package Manager,
Sure.
probably even from a local drive here and there. Uh, but uh, when it gets there, that looks beautiful and fantastic and snappy and quick and easier.
Yeah, one thing to note, I didn't show it here, is that you can install local packages that are in the tar.gz on your system
Oh, okay.
with Rix. So that part is covered. So if you just build it and download on your system and make sure it's available on your host system as the tar.gz, you can do that too. So that's a
Oh,
great
okay,
catch.
interesting.
Yep.
Oh, that's really cool. All right, if there are no other questions, then I think we can end 2 minutes early and jump to our next sessions. Thank you again. Big thank you, Eric. Wonderful presentation. And thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Daniel. And then I'm going to be tuning in the rest of the conference too. Hope you all enjoy it. And again, tune in on Wednesday for Bruno's workshop. If your interest is piqued, he's going to dive into many more of the technical details. So we look forward to that.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, bye bye.